I'm Sarah Jackson, and this is Internal Comms Pro, the podcast. We're getting the gears turning as we talk to the experts on our ever-changing world of internal communications. This season, we're shifting the mindset.
I think it's employee perception of the workplace would be, because I always also say perception's reality. So no matter how good of a job you think you're doing, if your employees don't see it the same way, then you aren't doing a great job.
The topic of workplace culture has been discussed for ages. There seems to be a fine line when it comes to good workplace culture. Do too little, and there's no sense of unity within the company. Do too much, and the mood may shift to annoyance over strict or tight controls. Especially with COVID, companies are still struggling to find that balance as to what worked in an office setting doesn't work remotely. Our guest for today is Nathan Stuck, the Director of Corporate Culture and Strategic Impact at Ad Victoriam Solutions. Spending over 4 years in the company, Nathan has helped build Ad Victoriam's workplace culture and was there when it needed to be restructured. Nathan shares his learnings through his growing company and gives us a few tips on what your company can do as well. Let's jump right in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Sarah. I am Nathan Stuck. I'm the Director of Corporate Culture and Strategic Impact at Ad Victoriam Solutions. I also run Be Local Georgia, which is a nonprofit community kind of organizer for all the B Corps in the state of Georgia. And then I'm a part-time lecturer at the University of Georgia, where I teach a class on surprise B Corps. And I also have a little side consulting business where I will help companies certify as B Corps. So pretty active in that space, if you can't tell.
Oh, well, wonderful. Well, I am so excited to have you on the show, not only because you wear so many different hats, but we're super interested in your title, Director of Culture and Strategic Impact. So many of our listeners now, their roles have expanded with this new world of hybrid work, and now all of a sudden they've got culture and employee experience in their title. So I want to dive into that. And I know we're going to be talking about aligning business and culture today. But before we kind of jump in, let's get your backstory. How did you get involved with the internal communication world?
I always joke sometimes when I'm talking to students, I feel like only the finance kids know that what they want to do when they graduate. I guess I just kind of fell backwards into it because, I have, previous lives. I literally, I was in the logistics industry for 5 years. I spent 5 years, 2 in rental and 3 in outside sales for enterprise. So, and then I went back to get an MBA. January of 2016, there was a project through the Net Impact Club that this company called Ad Victoriam Solutions wanted to certify as a B Corp. And I kind of went, okay, that sounds neat. So I went to the meeting and really liked the owner of the company, and his wife was really cool. And so I was like, yeah, I'll work on this project. And I ended up working on it. But it's supposed to be 1 semester, no class credit. And I kind of at the end of the semester was like, hey, I have an internship this summer, but afterwards, do you want to keep the project going next semester? So, a couple of the team members and I decided to keep working. And towards the end of, now I'm getting into my 3rd semester and I'm getting into the job hunt. And the owner of the company was like, hey, what are you doing when you graduate? We'd love for you to come work for us. And I'm like, oh, okay. But they're an IT consulting firm. We do Salesforce implementations. I'm like, yeah, but I'm really bad with technology. So he's like, that's cool. We'll figure something out. What do you want to do? You want to do marketing, don't you? I was getting a marketing MBA. So I went to work for them. And of course, what did I end up doing? I got a marketing MBA to never work in operations again. And I did operations, but I also was finishing up that B Corp certification.
Well, you've been mentioning B Corp. Can you define that a little bit for our listeners, for those who might not know what that means?
Yeah, so B Corps are certified for-profit businesses. It's basically to a for-profit business what LEED is to a building. It really is kind of it's all the SDGs and basically all environmental, social, governance, performance. So it's kind of the gold standard of corporate social responsibility. There's around 4,000 worldwide right now, and Just to name drop some of the ones that your listeners that will be familiar with, like Patagonia certified, Allbirds, Tom's Shoes, Tom's of Maine, Patagonia, or I already said Patagonia, Warby Parker, Jenny's Ice Cream, Athleta.
Well, let's dive into this conversation about aligning business and culture. How, first of all, before we get into culture, language matters. How do you define culture? Do you get a definition that you use, or what are we talking about when we're talking about culture?
I think it's employee perception of the workplace is would be, because I always also say perception's reality. So no matter how good of a job you think you're doing, if your employees don't see it the same way, then you aren't doing a great job. So yeah, I think it's all the things that just go into, employee engagement. How happy are you at work? Do you like your coworkers? Do you have challenging work? And do you, I don't know, I guess I would define it as, a good culture should make people excited to come to work in the morning, or I guess nowadays roll out of bed in the morning and open their
Well, and I,
computer.
I I feel like it's how people feel, right? How does this company, make me feel? And so if that culture piece is now put on the internal communicator's plate, which for so many of our listeners it is, and they're in strategic planning, they're finishing it up, they're getting ready for 2022. If that's now something that my department is now in charge of, um, why is it important when you say, and what are you talking about when you're talking about aligning business with culture? What does that mean?
I think a lot of it, especially from the communication standpoint, is are we who we say we are? When we're putting out, and this is where I work a lot with the marketing team as well, is, what are we saying about ourselves on Glassdoor, on LinkedIn, and what are we saying to customers about, who we are as a company? Because I mean, nowadays the first people that are going to call you out are your employees. They're the ones that are living it. So if there's a big gap there, I think you run a real risk of kind of like a retention spiral, and it's a very quick transition from unhappy to resentment to bitter to, almost like anti-company, I think, when you're pretending to be something you aren't. So for me, step one has always been defining current state. Like, we just got our employee survey back, but I'll follow up that employee survey with, I'll do one-on-one interviews. Granted, I've been there for a really long time and I used to do operations, so everybody knows me, but they know that if I tell them it's an anonymous, I'm sure there's some skepticism, but if I say, hey, this is anonymous, I just want to do a one-on-one, and they'll hear me during the conversation, say something like, I talked to somebody else and they told me this, and I'm very protective of the sources as I say things and I ask questions, but I want to get a sense from different people and different roles and different, if you're in the office 5 days a week or you live in Seattle and you're never in the office, trying to get an understanding of what that perception actually is, before I do anything at all. Because then I think that is where you kind of can start to formulate your strategy for how we're going to talk about the company, how we're going to talk about what it's like to work here, is just let your people tell you.
So when you talk about aligning business, are you talking about the strategic business goals? Like, are you aligning those to the party? And should you be doing that? How do you do that? Is that something that the internal communicators should be thinking about as they're planning culture type things?
For me, it's I let the, again, we do IT consulting and I was in operations, so I used to be a part of these conversations a lot more, but as we've grown, I didn't have time to wear both hats. So the overall business strategy, I let come from those in charge of. However, and this took time. This took me knowing, personalities, and we do predictive index now. We used to use DISC, but because of my role, I've become kind of an expert on those. So I know what I'm doing and how to communicate and how to figure out what makes, our CEO tick. And so a lot of this took some work, but getting them of like, hey, let me know what you're rolling out and tell me how you're going to roll it out first. And let's talk through what that looks like. That not necessarily that, I'm going to tell you that, that we should do this policy instead of this policy. I mean, I might if it's culture related, but But if it's, hey, we're going to change the billable targets for our consultants, like that's not really my call. But let's talk through how we're going to roll that out. Let's talk through how we're going to, because you again, you're selling it to your team. So help them understand, especially with Gen Z and millennials. They want to know why. This isn't the the olden days where you just kind of you gave the edict and it was jump and you said yes sir, how high. Um, it's, well, why am I jumping? I don't understand. Well, if I don't understand why I'm jumping, then it's stupid. Why do I have to jump?
Our talk with Nathan will continue after a message from our friends at Circle. One of the easiest ways to strategically shift your department is through figuring out what metrics matter and tracking them. Our sponsor Circle knows that each IC department are as unique as snowflakes. That's why the Circle Broadcast Suite provides communicators with custom, shareable dashboards. Use your unique content and channel analytics to provide department insights to your team and higher ups. Head on over to circle.com/ICP. That's CERKL.com/ICP to learn more about how you can broadcast your employee stories in an impactful way. Welcome back. Now that we've set the stage on what defines workplace culture, Nathan explains how that changed with a hybrid workforce and how it was the employees that ultimately shaped their current culture plan. Let's jump back in. Talk to me about the new world of work with are you at home and do you have a hybrid schedule and how is that impacting and has impacted the culture?
We've never really been sticklers about, outside of our training classes, when we hire fresh out of undergrad, we want them in the office every day for the first 3 or 4 months to get a feel. Especially when you're talking to somebody fresh out of college and saying, hey, go work remote. Like, let's, when they haven't really had that job yet, it's like, just learn how to be a professional, how to work and be around other professionals. And then after 6 months, 9 months, once we trust you, we really don't care if you want to move. I have noticed that transition very difficult for some people, going from being in the office every day to deciding they're going to move and then kind of going, I really like seeing people every day. So it's become a bigger challenge now because I think a lot of people got used to working from home, whereas our office used to be full when I go in, once every couple of weeks because I'm an hour and a half away, and every time I would see a bunch of people. And now I notice that very few are have really come back to the office, or they go in a day a week or 2 days a week. So it's become our remote workforce that used to be, the guy that lived in Seattle or the woman that lived in Hawaii is now like the person that lives 10 miles from the office. So, and figuring out how you engage them, we do virtual social hours, and, we try to put on as much programming as possible. And, sometimes it's a winless situation, no matter what you, what you plan or how you try to engage. People are busy and they're on their computers all day. So asking them to stay from 5 to 6 to chat with their coworkers is kind of like, I'm done. I don't want to be. And so you get basically the strongest of extroverts will show up and that's about it. So yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky, and we're not going back. I say we're, that's a collective we. I don't know that we're going to be able to go back. And I think you're going to see, especially people that enjoyed this privilege for a year and a half now, and were able to be productive. I mean, talk about a communications challenge. How do you sell that to them? The why you need to be back in the office.
Well, that's why I'm so interested in this because our listeners, this is one of the challenges, right? So if the leadership is concerned about this, what is the plan to make people want to go into the office? I mean, are you choreographing moments that matter? Like how are you and is it even a concern in your company, right? Like, do they care that everybody's fine? If the productivity's up, great. But from a culture perspective, when so many moments are just serendipitous and so many conversations that matter just kind of happen when you're face to face, how do you intentionally make that happen in a remote environment?
Slack has probably been the best tool. Just because we then, you can form little interest groups. So there's a food channel and a movie channel and a sports ball channel. And I mean, I think there's a crypto channel.
Well, and
um,
then that goes back to empowering them to kinda do those things.
yes. Yeah. And honestly, and it's funny because I've started incorporating more and more of this into our onboarding of, to take ownership of your experience here. And because a lot of times in this role, the kind of the culture role, when you're used to doing more strategy, and yeah, you're kind of the chief implementer, but people love to throw ideas over the fence at you and just go, "Hey, Nathan, catch this." And they're like, "I think we should do this," and you're like, Okay." And there was one, and it was an employee that I absolutely love, and we've worked together for a really long time. But they want to do something. I said, "Great. When is it planned for? I'll help promote it." They went, "Well, I don't really have time to plan it." And I was like, "Well, that's a week away, so I don't either." So, like, hey, if you want to do something fun, like, just put it on the calendar, invite some people, put it in Slack, and then I'll run with it from there. But it's every idea. Sometimes it's kind of like, I learned this from our CEO too, where it's like, if you're going to complain about something at the company, what's your solution look like? If you come with the complaint plus the solution, people are a lot more willing to listen. So, but yeah, I would say Slack for us has been the best one. And the virtual social hours. Yeah, but I wish there was a better answer. I don't know that the silver bullet has been found for remote engagement. And I've had deep conversations with colleagues, with friends, with coworkers of like, I don't know that I don't know that that experience will ever be what the office experience is. And I think that might be what needs to be communicated. That, going remote, and I'm an extrovert, I struggled with it for a while and it was difficult. And I felt, if I didn't hear from anybody for a week, I assumed I was doing a terrible job. So I think there's an emotional intelligence piece. I think there's a training piece around kind of helping people. Some people are naturally great at it. A lot of our coders and our data analysts are really good at this, and they just want to roll out, do their work, close their laptop at 5. And they wouldn't necessarily want to talk to people in the office either. So they love it. But I think it's a training piece. It's helping people understand what working remote is, how to be successful at it, or how to, and how to, yeah, the stress leads into other things too, because you work at home and your partner works at home, and at the end of the day, you have nothing to talk about because you've seen them multiple times throughout the day. So I think that's really what it is. I think it's coming to grips with it is different and it's not the same. And I don't know that all these different little, whatever we want to call them, virtual events are really going to change that.
Well, I love this, and I know we're coming up on the end of our talk here today, but I wanted to ask push on this a little bit because I think you bring up a good point about having that demographic data and any data when you go approach leadership. So, talk to me about any tips that you might be giving our listeners when they go talk to leadership. Um, when they're trying to communicate or trying to, get some sort of strategic culture plan through. How do you approach leadership and get that stuff done?
Oh, all the data. I bring well, I think if your company's done a disc or a predictive index or one of those Myers-Briggs, know your audience. I mean, granted, now I've known my CEO since he championed that project. So I met him January of 16. So we're going on 6 years. And at this point, we're friends. His daughter goes to UGA. Like I know exactly what makes him tick. I've pushed him too hard a couple times. But know who you're presenting to. Like, be able to, like, I know his attention span. I know what convinces him, what doesn't. I know what bores him. I know how many bullets to put on a slide. So I think that's very important too, to understand your audience and what that executive is, what their personality type is, how they make decisions, how they process information. Because there's kind of a I mean, it's like a psychological thing as well. Not that you're tricking them, just that you're communicating in their style. And number two is bring as much data to the table as possible. When I'm presenting stuff, I'm like, okay, here, like our survey results recently, it was like, and here's where I think the problem is. And I was talking about the transparency and how we rolled things out and how we communicated it and what was missing and the goodwill that we were leaving on the table. But I was able to show him, satisfaction by age group, by demographic, by remote versus in office, by how long they'd been with the company, and to start to be able to show some of those trends using data, I think is very powerful. And to show those before you get into the recommendations of like lay out the facts and then lay out here's why I'm recommending what I'm recommending, and here's how we're going to do it together. And honestly, it was something as simple as just when you guys are going to roll something out, put 30 minutes on my calendar and let's talk about it.
I love that. And you know what? That's such a sales tactic as well. Just the things that you said. Here's the data, but then knowing your audience of how they tick, and it's kind of like the same thing with knowing your customer. So I love that this sort of kind of came back full circle, and it is a very much a sales sort of skill that we need as internal communicators. So, well, I can't thank you enough, Nathan, for kind of giving us your insight into how to align business and culture, and especially with our listeners taking on new culture and employee experience roles. If people wanted to connect with you, and pick your brain a little more, would you be okay with that? And if so, how can they find you?
I love these conversations. So yes. So sometimes I say yes too much too, and then my calendar fills up and I'm like, why did I do this to myself? But no, I always love to, I feel like you always learn from colleagues. And again, that's why within the B Corp community, I have the B culture call that I started. And it's almost like it's a support call. So yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best way. So it's linkedin.com/Nathan A. Stuck.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me, Sarah. I really enjoyed it, and it's always fun too. And I mean this. I always get new ideas. I'm a think out louder. So as I get on podcasts and I talk about these things, I'm like, oh, I could do this a little bit differently. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk to your listeners. Hopefully, they found it insightful, and I know I have some nuggets I'll take away as well.
I'm Mandy Zaransky-Hurst, Chief Operating Officer and Head of Leadership Councils for Ragan Communications. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Steve Holmes from the Home Depot. Steve is the Chief Communications Officer, and he's also a member of Ragan's Communications Leadership Council. For the Council, we're an exclusive membership for senior-level communicators. We share best practices, peer-to-peer networking, and information. We also provide training for your entire communications team. So today, Steve and I are going to talk about ESG and ESG communications, which has become such a hot topic for so many organizations, and it has such merit. We're seeing more and more requests for ESG communications discussions and learning for all levels of communicators. Steve, thanks for being here.
Hey, Mandy, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
So, Steve, let's talk about Home Depot's philosophy on ESG. So, ESG, environmental, social, and governance. It's such a key piece of sustainability and reputation, but also an area where communications teams can have a lot of potential impact. So, what's the Home Depot's philosophy to start on ESG?
Well, for us, it's obviously it's become more and more important from the standpoint of the interest of investors and potential candidates or associates for the store, for the company. For the longest time, we really didn't do a ton of communications around it. And what's interesting is we've been very much involved on all of the planks of ESG, especially in environmental and community and things like that, and focus on our associates. Gosh, for decades. We realize now, though, and I think I say nothing that any other communicator in my position wouldn't know, is that the expectation of everyone for companies to be involved in these areas is higher and more important than ever.
So, Steve, what's one way that employers can bring awareness to ESG within their companies? For example, what is the Home Depot doing? I know you have literally hundreds of thousands of associates that are deskless. And so, how are you sharing with them the importance of what the Home Depot is doing around ESG?
Well, I think it starts with the beginning of your question. You said, what's one thing that we're doing? And that's just the problem. I mean, we actually have over 500,000 associates. So there's no one thing that you can do. I've never been a fan of just flooding all the channels with the same message. But I tell you what, as you really step back and you look at trying to reach that many people, we try to hit them through all channels. We try to educate our associates through all of those channels. Their expectations are high that we're doing these important things in our world today beyond just running the business. So we have a number of, obviously, like every company, pretty much, we have an intranet, we have an internal social site, we have a large broadcast operation that is just a real treasure to be able to reach associates both live or recorded, obviously. We have digital boards in our stores that are basically, billboards for us. And it just, on a lot of it, it may be the same message or it may feel redundant, but the reality is, with that many people are getting their information in different ways. So one of the things that I think a lot of us as communicators might forget, we forget that the associate or the employee that is at their desk, if they have email, that's likely their most important communication channel. So for those associates, we lean in on email communication. So things like that. I just think you have to pick and choose, but you have to hit all the channels to reach that many people.
Yeah, and I imagine that those did you knows are a point of pride for your associates, that as they hear more about what the Home Depot is doing around ESG, it makes them proud to be an employee and it deepens their brand relationship and does so many wonderful things for the culture.
Well, you took the word out of my mouth, and I was going to say that it's important, it's critical to our culture. And that's because it goes really, as I said earlier, it goes all the way back to, the founding of our company and our values. And ESG is just, it's rooted right in those values that are so important across our entire company. Yeah, it's terribly important. You also mentioned a word that I had in my head when you said pride. And one of the things that we realize too is that when your associates, one of your most important channels can be external in the media and social media and things like that. And when associates see things there, they take a lot of pride in that as well.
I imagine so. It's great that you're employing similar messages on so many channels in the hopes that everybody will get some of the messages around what the Home Depot is doing with regards to ESG. So, where are the opportunities for the comms team to have more influence in ESG and ESG communications?
Well, I mean, they're the lead. That's their role. I think one of the missed opportunities that I feel great about that the team has done is not thinking within the communications function and collaborating beyond. Because it's real easy for us. My head goes immediately when you ask that question. It immediately goes to, well, we're the comms function. Of course, we have this important part in all of this or role in this. But you have to think, I believe, beyond that function. And what are the other functions that
Mhm.
have a role in communications to different stakeholders, perhaps, or just through different channels in different ways?
Yeah, and when you do, there's this great symphony effect, right? And that has a halo, and the employees get a better understanding of what's happening around ESG or any other key topic. But it only happens with good internal communication and in partnership between teams.
Yeah, and I think one of the ingredients to achieving that is you really got to work hard to make sure the team as a whole understands the importance of what they're working on. So you said any topic. That's just so true. It's you've got, as a team in communications, you have so many different things that you're working on and communicating, all of them important. But when you have something where you need, what I would say, a whole SWAT team on it, you've you've really got to instill the importance of why this is important to the company and beyond, um, to get them, all running in that same direction, and working together.
So, when I think about ways in which employees can bring awareness to ESG within their company, it sounds like you're saying collaboration, working well as a team, understanding the root of the why. Is there anything else?
Well, you mentioned pride, and I think that in itself, we forget too that employee, or as we call them, associates, when they go home and they're talking to their neighbor or talking to a friend anywhere, and they're like, "Oh, we did this cool thing," with whatever it might be. It may be just that did you know fact that they saw, and they share it with someone else. Um, so to me, that's the end result that I would really love to have.
I would agree. And then when we think about the environmental piece of the puzzle, it does go much beyond the brand and offers more safety for the whole entire globe for a much longer period of time if we're all working together to try and shore up what is currently being done around environmental, social, and governance.
Well, friends, we are at the end of our 6th season. Our goal was to focus on topics that help the IC Pro shift the mindset on how they approach their work and value. From hybrid work to DEI, we've been so grateful for the dozens of experts that have been on our show. We hope this season helped you look at your work differently and that you're working towards shifting your mindset for the better. We'll see you next season on Internal Comms Pro, the podcast.
A huge thank you to our sponsor, Ragan, Mandy Zorinsky-Hurst, and our featured guests for being a part of our new segment. If you're interested in more information about Ragan's Communications Leadership Council, an exclusive membership for senior-level communicators and their entire communications teams, please go to commscouncil@ragan.com. Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, is also proudly supported by the Circle Broadcast Suite, an entire suite built for internal communicators. Learn more at circle.com. Internal Comms Pro, the podcast, is produced by the Internal Comms Pro Collective. Don't forget to visit www.internalcommspro.com/show notes for our free resource guides. Thank you for listening.